Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. In this video, we are looking at fluid chords from Pitch Innovations. This is a little bit of a kooky one, and it's a little bit of a niche, but it is interesting and I think well done. And if it's a problem that you think needs solving, then this is a pretty decent solution. Bear in mind, it is, of course, only ever an interim solution, but this interim has been going on for a very long time. So what does it do? Let's take a listen. Let's go again. Now, if you didn't spot it, let's go again. Maybe you notice the difference there. What's happening is that this plugin is enabling chords to slide. And very easily you might go, yeah, but everyone can do that. You just use the wheel on the side there and everything goes whoop. Yeah, it does. Listen to Billy Idol's Eyes Without a Face. It starts with a big slide of chord. The issue there, or the difference here, the issue with MIDI as it sits is that when you play a chord and use your pitch bend wheel, this takes over, so you can't hear the difference here. The whole chord slides equally. So if you've got a C, E, G major triad, if you shift that by 4 semitones, then you end up with the same triad up, but you've probably changed key. And that's okay, that's cool. There are ways to use that very nicely. Again, note, Billy Idol. Although that was probably not Billy himself who did it, but maybe it was. I would assume it was Keith Forsey thing. Not necessary to know one way or another. What this does, and if you looked at the super cool animation, you see these chords, that's what's currently playing, and they're morphing to another chord, meaning that unlike the let's just move everything equally, this is saying we can go in lots of different directions at once. You get me? This is a little bit of a barrier breaker within the traditional MIDI system. Sliding chords, pretty darn interesting. I will say, however, that all that white is making my face look pasty. I do prefer the white, but somebody's going to be very upset with me if I don't change the colour, so now I don't look quite as pasty. Possibly give slightly better contrast for viewers, I don't know. I would use the white one myself, but it's awfully early in the morning here, so it's a little easier for my pasty complexion to use the dark skin. There you go, I showed you a feature. Very clever, slipped that one in. Righto, so what are we looking at? We need to step back a little bit to understand why this is a thing, why it matters, why we might care. And we don't have to care. This is a little bit of an edge case, but there are some cool things that can be done with it. MIDI came out in early to mid-80s, and it was an established standard. And it was MIDI 1, and guess what? MIDI 2 still hasn't really been finalised, let alone implemented across the board. MIDI has moved very, very slowly. If MIDI were run by the iPhone institution, then we'd probably be on MIDI 375. It wouldn't work most of the time, especially whenever there was an update, but we would be on MIDI 375. One of the advantages to MIDI is that it is bulletproof. People will complain about limits and what have you, but MIDI is bulletproof. MIDI goes on hundreds, thousands of stages every night all around the world and has done since 83 or whatever it was. I really can't be bothered looking at the date. It shouldn't matter. Some pedant will. And it always works, unlike analog stuff before. So it's a wonderful system out of which all our DAWs are built. They're all built around MIDI. Reason doesn't talk about MIDI much, and it took ages for it to even have a MIDI out to be able to interface with the external world. And why you'd want to do that, I have no idea. But it still underpins how we handle music, making in a digital form. A lot of people struggle to understand the difference between audio and MIDI. I sort of get it, but I absolutely sort of don't. MIDI is quite literally the information. When I press a key, that's simply information that gets fed off to the system. In this case, to my computer, to my DAW, which is then pumped through to a synthesizer. Let's go to the lead, which has no MP3. Press a note down, it sends a note on information. Let go sends a note off information. What the synthesizer does with it is damn business. MIDI has also been used for lighting for a long time. I'm not sure that lighting even has changed their system. I think they still use MIDI. We then have controllers, which allow us to do things like pitch bend. But note if I play a chord, that whole chord moves, meaning that when I hit target, it's entirely probable that I've changed key. There are also things like mod wheel and various other controllers which are assigned to various things like volume and pan and what have you, but it's just information that a synthesizer needs to translate into audio. So MIDI is simply taking the performance and rather than drawing it as dots and lines on paper, putting it into this quickly transmittable information of up to 16 channels at the one time. So up to 16 instruments can be having all kinds of stuff going on with very little problem. And by very little, I mean none that's enough to cause any actual dramas to anybody who's actually more interested in getting the work done. Yes, you can clog MIDI, and yes, you can end up with timing errors, but they're so small that nobody really needs care about it. There are people who do care about it, but that's their problem. But because MIDI hasn't updated, then there have been some frustrations within the synth community because there are things that could be done, that can be done within the DAW environment that weren't readily available on our Jupiter 8s and Prophet 5s. So they say, look, we need to update MIDI, and as I said, it just hasn't happened for whatever reason. I really don't know, whether it's politics or lack of cohesion, I really don't know. But somebody came up with a workaround, and it's called MPE. So MIDI polyphonic expression. So the problem here is while this synth is playing polyphonically, the changes that I'm making to modulations or continuous controllers just happen to everything. It's not possible to modify one note out of a collection of notes. MPE works around that. Note I don't say fixes it. It works around that by allowing us to target notes with changes in controller information. Therefore, enter the rubber keyboard, the Rolly Seaboard thing, no doubt I'll put a picture up here, where you can play them, and they work very strangely, and you can get very interesting results, either in trying to emulate the playing style of a real instrument, like a cello or a violin or whatever, but that's the downside of MPE, where people think it's about emulating real instruments because real instruments suck. I find that a little sad. You're not going to be able to emulate or duplicate or equal or better a real celloist, an underleg fiddler, with a rubber keyboard. It just doesn't work that way because there's a reason that underleg fiddlers fiddle the way they do because of anatomy and physics and all this kind of stuff. What MPE really offers is the ability to do things that otherwise can't be done. That's the cool thing with synthesis, that we can step outside the box. So one of the things that we can do with MPE is stuff like what they've done here. You can press one note and then have it fan out into a chord of lots of notes. Try doing that on a cello. Try doing that with a flute. You can't. So MPE is very cool. Step in Fluid Chords. This is not their first product. They have another one, which I think is just called Fluid. This one focuses just on chords, so it's a narrow down of their broader technology. Their broader technology did not really take off, and maybe this isn't going to really take off either, but they're targeting this at a particular arena, and it makes it interesting and a nice intro to their bigger platform, which honestly I have not tried, so I've got no opinion one way or another on Fluid. I saw early stuff and thought, oh, that's interesting, and honestly forgot about it. I don't know why. I think there was a cute girl in the video. Maybe that's what distracted me. What this is a fudge. So Fluid Chords is a fudge. It takes in normal MIDI data as it sits right now. So it takes in normal MIDI 1 point whatever we're on. Inside its guts up here, it transforms that into MPE. So it's a fudge. It's a faux MPE that is then able to be translated or performed by an MPE capable instrument. Note that Reason does not handle MPE at all. We can fire MPE at it and it won't be able to translate it. It won't do anything with it. So you need a synth that will receive it and handle it. And if you happen to have a DAW that does have MPE built in, then by all means, you may not need this, but even there, it may be cool. I don't know because I've never used MPE or its spec. MPE synths are still a little thin on the ground, but that will change over time. I think most manufacturers are waiting for the MIDI organization to finally pull their cork out and MIDI 2.0 become fully established, and then everybody might sort of finally go, we have a consensus and input it. Maybe that will have MPE built in. I don't fully understand because I never understand what their white papers are really about. They seem more about making white papers than they do about making something that I'm going to be able to use, and it's all a little relevant till I can use it. So it's a fudge, but it's a cool fudge. So again, let's just hear what we can't normally do. Yep, and that's that ability to morph from one chord to another, or as I'll show you, from one note to a chord. It's kind of cool. Who are these people? As I indicated, this isn't their first entry into the world. There is a product called Fluid, which is a little bit more open than this. But again, I haven't used it, so I have no opinion. I just remember looking at the videos when it came out, sort of going, that's a bit interesting. This is just purely designed to morph from one chord to another. They are trying to get into a particular kind of market, trying to chase EDM kids. They talk about making risers and what have you out of this, and probably you can. So in some ways, yep, it's cool for that. They have what comes across as a tremendously impressive trailer. Initially, my first thoughts on this, because I hadn't realized that it was the same people behind Fluid, even though it's a little self-evident, my first impressions were like, oh god, no, not more hyperbole. But the trailer was really impressively done. It was very nicely put together. And while there is lots of hyperbole in here, music's never been heard before, it does actually kind of work out more than it doesn't. The product is $75, which is not cheap, and is definitely not cheap for what is kind of a slightly throwaway, now you'll use it, now you won't sort of thing, assuming you're writing normal music. But nonetheless, if this is a thing that you've been really wanting to do, or you realize that there is a coolth in this, beyond just a bit of a novelty you might use once and forget about, then it's probably worth it. I don't know, I'm very much on the fence as to how much I would use it. One of the problems that I face in that arena is simply, I don't know how much I use it until I'd actually have it in my system when I was writing an album. I'm not writing an album now. I would use it once or twice, but would I think to pick it up over and over, or would I be concerned that with a record where every chord goes whoop, would it just become a tacky thing? I don't know. That's going to come down to you, your writing style, and how you use or abuse the plugin. I'm overall very positive about it as it sits for the fact that it does what it says it's going to do and does open a door that's otherwise not particularly open. Yes, for the pedants, we could split our chord there into 4 completely separate instances of the instrument and then use our mod wheels with targets and this, that, and the other to be able to do this, but it requires a lot more effort. It's like creating a polyphonic line with a monophonic synth. You've got to record this 4 times and do a lot of thinking and organizing to make sure that it stays coherent. So it is a good solution for an interim problem. We'll run through my good and bad, then we will dig into the product so you can see what it does, how it does it, and therefore hopefully have a greater understanding of whether it's likely to be a cool thing for you. My goods is that it does give you access to MPE. Bear in mind, fluid chords, which is what we're looking at here, gives you a rather specific solution of MPE. It doesn't give you full unbridled MPE. You would need to look at fluid and its feature set to see whether it gives you that. But it does give you access to a cool set of options, though limited, within MPE without having to have either one of those weird rubber keyboards or an MPE DAW. You do need an MPE capable synth, but we'll talk about them a little bit later. So in that sense, it is very cool. Its modes, it's got modes down the side. They are, on the whole, pretty elegant. They are generally just slightly different ways of approaching achieving the same outcome, but they are going to be useful. I'm more interested in real time because I'm more interested in being able to compose and control, but the other modes are useful potentially. And a good is, well, chord sliding is fun. I mean, it really is fun to be able to say, oh, I can morph from here to there. And it's not a fudge morphing. It's not like Michael Jackson turning himself into Donald Trump with a... You have to be old enough to remember the video. This is actually truly sliding, and that is fun. It is cool. There are negatives, of course, because this is a fudge. It can be a little clunky at times, and that is inevitable in this situation because it's taking one system and turning it into another system within A, the limits of what they've chosen to cover in the plugin, and B, the limits of the inevitability of trying to interface one system with another, where one of those systems is more advanced than the other. It obviously won't cover all synths. That really shouldn't need to be in the bad list, but we do need to discuss that simply because otherwise people are going to say, but it won't work with my... No, it can't, because we're trying to create an adapter, a fudge, from one older system with a limit to a newer system whose limits are further out. And there isn't a direct interface between the two, so this has created a kind of, well, it's an interface to sort of say, well, we'll go from there to here. And therefore, for it to work, you have to have an MPE capable of synth. If you plug this in and go, oh, but it won't use my non-MPE capable synth, that really is your fault and lack of understanding. But it is a limit. Don't overdo it! It is going to be very easy to get it and go put it on absolutely everything. Everything's sliding around all over the place like we're drunken idiots. And no doubt there are going to be some lo-fi songs that are already wandering around like drunken idiots who then put another layer of drunken idiocy over the top. If you get lucky and you get to be the 19 of the situation, brilliant. But if you just think that this is going to take your poor quality music and make it funky and cool, it's probably poorly used. That applies to absolutely anything, but nonetheless, be aware that that's a limit of this. It would be easy to overuse it. You note here in my construction, I didn't slide every change. if while I technically could have slid every single change in here, with the possible exception of the first one, simply because it's butted up against the beginning, it would have become musically less valid. And that's my warning. Don't overdo it. There is something which may be a Reason thing. I don't recall whether they were particularly supporting Reason in their thing, but my first thing is like, will it work in Reason? If it doesn't work in Reason, then it's no use to me. It's hard to have an opinion on things and be super keen where you couldn't use it in your own home environment. It becomes a lot more academic if I'm having to move over to Reaper to use something. But the possible issue is that it can seem very slow on startup, particularly on starting or changing the synth that's running this. I don't know whether it's a Reason thing, but I would hope that if the devs are watching this, and I obviously always hope the devs watch all of my feedback on things, then that might be worth looking at, because initially I thought, uh-oh, I'm not going to be able to do this review because this thing stalls. It seemed to have stalled my machine for quite some time. So if you load it or load an instrument and your DAW seems to stall for a minute, go have a cup of tea. It does overcome itself every single time, but it does seem to happen every single time. Just a thing to be aware of, not a killer, just an annoyance, may actually just be a bug, or it may even be an inevitability of having to establish all the inside goings on, the database, the this equals that, and how to turn this into that it may have to establish something or other on the fly, which takes time. Don't know. I'm not going to put it as a real negative. It's just a thing to be aware of, but people will go, that sucks. And it sort of does, but not enough to cause you real problems. Now let's dig into this. This is the more interesting part of the program, now that I've had my 2 cents worth. We've got fluid chords. There is some settings, help tray, what have you, transpose. We can show where chords have been transposed and stuff, might be useful. We can globally transform. We've got this ability to change skin color. Again, I would prefer the light skin most of the time, but after the last person who told me that my videos were totally unwatchable because I didn't dare use the dark GUI, I'd hate for you to be upset. And MPE bend range, I assume that's the total range at which we can bend notes. That's changeable. And note distribution. There are help things down here which you can turn on or off if you want. You can also preset a glide time in milliseconds. I've gone a little bit longer because I want it to be obvious when I'm gliding. But there are ways to do your glides manually as well. The first thing we'll see is this great big interface and playing chords and what have you. So we go to auto mode here. It's not doing anything. This is because we need to play keyboard keys on the bottom of the range. So I'm playing C1 to trigger the initial chord, D1 to go to the next one. Now these are predefined chords. When we click on C1, see we've got chords laid out. We can tell the system how to do this, which we will look at a little bit later. And we need to trigger the first one, and then whilst the first one's still down, trigger the second one. See our auto glide time, which we can change. Try doing that with normal MIDI. Even with a fudge, it's going to be really hard. So we've got a chord which is one note. Yes, I know it's not a chord. And we're having it splay out, which means that some notes are going up, some notes are going down. That's the first mode. That's the auto mode. That's the easiest way to start to understand what it does. At the bottom of the screen, we've got our current chord. At the top, we've got our target chord, and then shows them moving together. There's various little bits of information up top which help you understand what's going on. That's the auto mode. Everything's handled automatically. The glide is automatic. Everything is handled automatically. It does lock out MIDI controller information, and if we play higher up, we can actually be playing at the same time as ourselves, which can be cool or confusing, but is primarily designed as a pretty hands-off Casio sort of a situation. It is nicely done. There's then fixed. Fixed is where we play our initial chord. It then shows if I bend up, it's going to go here. If I bend down, it goes there. And that's not going to get annoying. But with some care, that could be a 19 sort of a moment. With care. I have no intention of really pursuing that, at least not at the moment, but there's something kind of cool in there. So that's a little bit more manual than the previous mode. You press donor, and then it gives you the option based on these keys to go up or down, and it goes in a circle. So if I press this one, it goes to the former one, or the next one. And speed of the move, the slide, is based upon how speedy I am with the mod wheel. Cool. And assumes that, yep, we can do it by hand as well. Which means that you could do it via MIDI too. As in, you could do it via putting stuff in here. So it's a semi-manual mode. Fluid, this one's a little trickier, so I may well get it wrong. No. Okay, yes, this was... You press your target, and then you do the mod wheel thing. It's a variant of fixed. So you choose your first one. In this case, I'm choosing here. You choose your second one. And it doesn't matter whether you go up or down with the mod wheel, it goes to the next one. Each mode variant, oh sorry, somebody's suddenly deciding to mow the lawn. Each mode variant will give you slightly different results, some advantages and of course disadvantages in certain situations. They are, again, sort of fudges for people who are not going to sit down and work out the nuts and bolts of creating an actual performance. They are pretty cool. It's the one that interests me because it actually allows you to control this thing as much as possible like a real device in a DAW. It's where you're creating a performance with mass control. So if we look here, we've got our data, and we can add pitch bends, but to make this system work, this version, and it warns you, you need to use a sustain pedal. So if you look carefully, we play our first note, we trigger our sustain pedal, and then we play the second chord. Let's just move this here. Oh, that needs to be at 0. Okay, sometimes there is a thing where it gets a little confused. What are we doing? I have had this a few times. I'm not sure why. There we go. See, so it's like the other modes in that you choose your target, and your target doesn't actually become active until you have started the mod wheel. Modding. Just a thing to be aware of. So you play your target, but nothing happens until you say, now we're going to move. There are advantages in that. In that if we were doing this in performance, I'm on stage backing the Moody Blues, then I can choose where I am at the moment. I can press my next set of chords, because I'm doing this all in real time, and then hold until I want to do the sweep. There are swings and roundabouts. Here you will see that despite my chord really hitting here, I have decided to go early. The reason to go early here is because if I go late, then everything's always lagged behind. If you record a good guitarist, you'll find that he plays his chords almost early. He's going to strum, and his strum begins early. His strum can begin here, so that most of the chord sounds here. A poor guitarist will start his strum about here, because he's going, oh, there's the beat, oh, shit, what chord am I supposed to, oh, I better, and plays late. A not very good one will start his strum on the beat, but one who's really started to feel music will actually strum early. The beginning of the strum is early. This is the same. If we're going to slide and feel musical, we probably want to start our slide early. Because once we've got notes around it, because that slide is fairly long, we want any notes around it to feel like we're keeping our time. Otherwise our time just wanders. Our pitch is wandering. We don't want our time to wander too much at the same time. Otherwise it feels like we've just waited, like I say, like a poor guitarist who goes, oh shit, I'm going to have to play a chord. Oh, there's the beat. Now I've got to work out what chord I'm going to play. Oh, there it is. Groove completely lost. So just be aware that when you're programming it, you might well make MIDI that looks a little funny. If you're using any kind of device vaguely like this, your MIDI probably already looks funny, but the advantage of this mode over using these modes where my MIDI wouldn't look like proper MIDI at all, it would just look like this. These are just the triggers, even though they sound like chords. So it's impossible to decipher musically what that really is. You have to go remember it, which, from a composer's perspective, actually sucks. Whereas here, the real-time mode allows you to actually see what's going on. So if I then open up my lead at the same time, then we can see the chords that are being played. Yes, timing here, there's a gap, but I can fill that. We can get used to the fact that that plays early, because technically it sort of does. Now I can actually say, how is my harmony looking, and visually see it, which is the real advantage of the real-time mode. It's where you have the most amount of control. Here, this one looks funny, but I've got a slide at that point. So you just kind of get used to that, but it gives you far better visual confirmation of what's going on. There are extra little options which explain themselves, but you are going to need to just take your time to say, what happens when I do this as opposed to when I don't do this? The inevitability, which I said some of the little bit of clunkiness on this, is that obviously you have to understand how the system really works, and you need to play it a couple of times until you get that aha moment. Oh, okay, that's what that does. Because it is a technical fudge. But a fudge that does work, despite its little moments like there where you saw it kind of didn't work. Something that's kind of interesting, you will get a warning perhaps. Real time launches with auto glide on, so as soon as I start playing something, you'll get this warning. interesting. It wouldn't let me stop. That warning is incredibly familiar, making me think that this is built on someone else's technology. My first thought, and I may be wrong, but my first thought there is, that's Melda. So again, Melda must have some system that's like a synthetic edit type thingy for devs to work around. I don't really care, but I know that Melda and Reason aren't the most comfortable of bedfellows, as you will have seen from an earlier review of something that was clearly built in their system. Just sort of wonder how that works. How does one get access to this thing? Don't know. It's not a biggie, but if you do see that warning, it's just that the autoglide was on and it's turning it off for you. So if that's going to be an issue, make sure that you're aware of that in advance. Again, it's just one of those little inevitable, slightly clunky things as a result of the fudges that are inevitable in making this thing happen. What else have we got? Okay, get back into the chord pads. So we'll get out of this. If we go to auto, then we've got these chord pads. You can hit the clear button and it clears what's in a chord. There doesn't seem to be a global clear. I would like a global clear, thank you, sir. Because when I begin, I don't want something already there. That annoys me, just like with synths. You launch a synth and it's got the most amazeballs patch ever. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for any patch. I'm looking for an init state. With a synth, I want it to be playing a sine wave or a sawtooth with simple envelope. That's it. I don't want to be playing funky bass lines with delays and this, that, and the other. Same with this. I don't want pre-built chords. Okay, yes, for those of you who care, there are some factory things. Please don't use these. If you are relying on somebody else's chord progressions, you're doing it wrong. You need to understand how the chord skeleton of your piece, like the framework of your piece, is working. If you're just borrowing other people's, going, oh, but they're cool, you're not really understanding the skeleton of your piece, and you will run into dramas that you don't solve, or you'd solve poorly. So get it down to a default state. This says C1. It's not a C chord, it's a nothing chord. You've then got to be able to tell it what you want. We can tell it this way and set up that that's now what pressing C1 will play. There is no system in here for saying, sir, you can't do that in C major. It's key scale agnostic, which is the right way for it to be. So you've got to manage your own things yourself. That's one way of getting things in there. The other way is that we've got a learn system. Now this is actually quite elegant. It's old school. It's like having a TB303. So I can press a chord. That's now populated C1. Now D1 has gone and made itself so that's now my chord progression. Very carefully thought through. So brilliant. Wasn't holding it enough. Sounds like a hit. That's the sort of old TB303 style of programming. It is actually pretty cool. If you know what your chord progression is already, or what the chords you're going to use this beastie to swoop, then you can just press, like, clear everything, press learn, and go for it. Actually, what happens if I press learn? Okay, it's gone to C1 again, so it obviously always starts at the beginning. What if I press a different one? Okay, so it overwrites. I turn off learn now. You have to have a certain amount of when you can and can't hold and release notes. It's not a thing I would ever use in performance, but you can. So that's the sort of simple way of doing it. If you want to program a pad that's in the middle, We can target that pad, learn. See, it doesn't jump to another pad. We've just learned that pad. You can learn trigger notes. Okay, I didn't read that one up, so to be honest, that has not gone as I was expected. I would say you'd need to read that one. Learn chord. Like that seemed to take the chord from D1 and throw it up to A. Okay. Learn chord. Let's just give ourselves a chord. There we go. So. Alright. And it's dealt with the fact that we've gone from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 3 notes very comfortably. That bit is definitely very elegant. We can cut a chord, we can copy a chord, obviously to paste it, and then we can transpose it. That one took a big dive, so let's transpose that up a whole octave. Ooh, that's kind of cool. But let's say I'm pretty poor, I can transpose that up 1 semitone. Remember, this does not stay within a key or scale, that's your business. Okay, we've changed key. But they're little technical things that you can do, and overall, once you learn the system, which is a little clunky, if you ever tried to program a TB303, you'd probably run screaming from the building. This is better than that, but it is similar to that. So you go through, you set up your pads if you're going to be using any of these modes. Okay, that's all elegant, bearing in mind the limits of the technology and the system. And again, if you've used anything like one of those classic sort of memory position things, this is as good as it gets. Real time we've talked about, that's the way that it goes. Now, the big thing is the synths. You can have absolutely no sound. That probably works better if you're using this as a freestanding thing and then feeding the, well, I shouldn't say MIDI, but MIDI MPE into a sequencer that handles it, a DAW that handles it. Obviously, Ableton Live, Bitwig, apparently Reaper does, but lots of things don't. So assuming MPE is a standard, it's not. It is a standard, but it's a substandard and not the standard. There is an internal synth, which is completely limited. This is that wait, and I was not going to do this. That took far longer than was comfortable. It's kind of cool that that is there, because it means that as a default, this is going to output something useful. You will see that in my region rack here, I have no instrument for this. This is the lead sound. This is the swoopy chords synth, and you can't see a synth because it's inside here. The internal synth you have no control over. It's just a very, very simple electric piano type thing. There's some stuff for setup and what have you. Then it will scan you. You've got to tell it to, but it'll scan your drive looking for synths that it recognizes on your system that are capable of MPE. I've got Batzilla, Surge. Surge is a free synth and is a very powerful synth. There's a pretty big review here on that. It may not be to everybody's taste, but it is a powerful thing. It's free, and its MPE is, I believe, really pretty good. Most MPE nuts will say Surge is a great place to go. To take advantage of all that MPE can do, you've got to get somewhere. When you turn on a synth, you have to make sure that MPE is enabled. This largely does enable MPE when you turn it on. Now, okay, we'll do this the hard way. I'm going to open Phase Plant. I will have lost my sound that I had made. This is an inevitability. What's happening is that this is stalled again, but I'll talk over it and it'll give us some sense of how long this is taking. It creates a shell for the VST that is doing the MPE stuff. Elegant, inelegant? Well, it is inelegant, but it's necessary if we're running in an environment that has no MPE, or even worse, doesn't allow MIDI out of a VST. So it solves its problem quite well, it just can take a while. You are going to need a synth, obviously, that does MPE, and if you want to get the most out of it, all I've done here is pitch, and I think that's all it does. But if you want to get the most out of it, then you could look at using modulators to take, let's say, pitch wheel here. We could apply pitch wheel instead to something else. So we could actually have this doing things like filters, depending upon the synth's ability to handle every voice separately. We could actually have filter opening on some notes that are going higher and closing on some that are going lower. This all depends on the synth, so do not take my word for it. It is not a feature of Fluid Chords. But that's how it works. There is some kind of big lag. It obviously can't manage the synth with any degree of finesse. If you want your presets to be there, they obviously save in the system. So as you see here, that's exactly where we started. So they save within the state, so that's cool. But if you want to be able to pick them up at a later date, like because you've moved from one instrument back to another, you are going to want to make sure that you saved your preset in your target instrument. A little clunky, but again, there is not really any other way of doing it, seeing we're actually making something that wasn't there and isn't there actually happen like it was there. It's a very cool and elegant fudge. So my final words are, again, restating a very cool and elegant fudge for a thing that we otherwise can't do this way. Yes, we can use our mod wheel to slide, to warp a chord, but every note moves and we're probably going to end up out of key. This system allows us to very specifically say donor chord is X, target chord is Y, define them, and then move from one to another using either these modes where you've set your chords up already, like this one, so press F1, one going to many, impossible in MIDI. That's one way of doing it, or the other options, or the real time where we get in and we have as much intricate control as is possible in the situation with the slides, where they occur in time, how they occur. So here I've drawn a straight line. In theory, we should be able to have and that worked. So we can have a wonky line. And there's no reason that we couldn't have various shapes, but understand that that won't necessarily go back down again. That is an interesting question in this situation. I don't anticipate this to work. And it did. Cool. I thought you may need to move back into a fixed or fluid mode, but this has all the functionality of that. Cool, I just discovered that it will do that. So you can actually have this do that kind of thing from within the various modes. So that gives you a lot of control, bearing in mind the limits on this method of fudging a solution. Of course, yes, we have to look at how useful is this. They're targeting this at EDM people and risers and this, that, and the other. And yes, I can see that is definitely a target where you want to go whoosh from here to there, and you want there to actually be valid, because that is a problem. You know, you take something and you pitch bend wheel it, or you just shift it with audio bubblegumming, then yes, you end up out of key, and that's a problem. It can be cool or it can be very inelegant. You've just got to deal with it, whereas this says you don't have to deal with it. Obviously, you've got to deal with making this work, but it solves that problem. So that's cool. I do see potential use in my personal environment because sometimes swooping chords, it's not a thing I think of that often, but I have done sometimes. But swooping chords is a thing that could be of some merit in some of my pieces. Again, I've got no particular answer on how much I would use it in the real world if I really had it. But I definitely think it's a cool effect, and from time to time would be a nice thing to do. I just don't use pitch pen that much at all, probably because by the time you've programmed it, it's just like, oh, that was a pain, can't be bothered, and there are probably other elegant ways of doing it, like portamento. But polyphonic portamento is not always available on synths and not always as elegant as you might hope. But this is a kind of a version of that. It all depends on your instrument and how it handles, or whether it handles, true polyphonic portamento. Price, obviously, is just going to come down to what you feel like it gives you. I think it's a fair price for what's a little bit of a niche bit of kit. Is it value for money in your situation? Depends how much you're going to use it. But as a sign of things that could be available when we finally have MIDI 2.0 or whatever it's going to be available in our doors, and or MPE broadly available, I think it's very cool, and I think kudos to Pitch Innovations for doing this and having come out as elegantly as it has, which makes me a little bit more interested in looking at Fluid to see what it actually does, and what it might give in terms of possibility. So in the broader sense, if you're in a non-MPE environment and wanting to MPE-ify things, then maybe Fluid is worth looking at. It may not function in Reason, or I may have to use it externally, but that's one of those things you'd have to look at. Again, I have no opinion one way or another. But it's an interesting device that opens some doors that may or may not be relevant for you. But if they are, or if you like what you see and you sort of think, that's pretty cool, this is elegant. You are going to have to work around the bits where it is a little clunky. That's largely just a result of creating an interface between two things that really don't work together, and possibly Melda or whatever their environment is that's never that comfortable in Reason, because as you saw, I had a couple of clunkies. One is that it's a great big long wait when you input or change an instrument, and the other being that sometimes it just loses the control of this. It just loses, but again, that may be more of a Reason thing, so stopping, multiple stops invariably puts it back. I can't work out what causes it to come unglued, but the more I use it, the less it seems to happen. So there may be a particular thing that I was doing that upset it in the first place. Doesn't really matter. It will come back. All right, I hope you have found this interesting. It is a little out of the box, but it is cool in its own way, even if only a look at things that we could have as more readily available in the future. If you have questions, pop them on down below. Please, preferably after hitting subscribe. All engagement is good, so long as it's positive engagement. No point writing negative things. I just had some negativity come out of something else that I'm doing, and it's like, dude, all you do is make yourself look small. Where's the win in that? Does anybody better is not going to want to work with you because you made yourself look small by trying to make me look small? Where's the win in that? Actually, I just had two this morning. One was using gender. How dare you mansplain? It's like, I wasn't mansplaining. I didn't even know you were a woman. Wouldn't have cared. You were rude to somebody else, and I ameliorated your rudeness. You don't like the fact that I ameliorated your rudeness, so you came out using gender. Don't do this stuff, lady. Don't do it at all. So, good questions below. There's also higherhertz.com. My name again is Benedict. This is for Higher Hertz. Most importantly, get out there, have a play with this. There is an open demo. Have fun.